Have you ever seen confidence shatter in front of 500 people in less than 8 minutes? March 20th, 1969, Long Beach, California. A towering, undefeated karate champion steps onto the stage and declares, "Kung Fu isn't real fighting." He challenges anyone in the audience to prove him wrong. For a moment, silence, and a quiet voice from the crowd says, "I accept." A small man in simple black clothes walks toward the stage. No belt, no title, no introduction. The champion doesn't know it yet, but he just challenged Bruce Lee, and what happens next will change martial arts forever. Before we begin, if you love real stories of courage, mastery, and the moments that redefine history, make sure to subscribe and join the journey. Because some stories aren't just told, they're experienced. Long Beach, California carried a strange kind of energy that evening, the kind that lives somewhere between excitement and ego, between discipline and spectacle. The International Karate Championships had become one of the most important martial arts events in America, and on March 20th, 1969, nearly 500 spectators packed the arena, their voices blending into a steady hum of anticipation. Some were students, some were instructors, some were curious observers, but almost everyone had come to see one man, Michael Chen, known across the tournament circuit as the Destroyer. At 6'4" and weighing over 200 pounds, Chen didn't just win matches, he dominated them, and his record spoke loudly. 47 straight victories over 5 years without a single loss. To many in the American martial arts community, he represented the future, powerful, athletic, disciplined, and trained for the rules of modern competition. That night, he was scheduled to defend his title once again, and the audience expected another display of precision and control, another reminder that the era of traditional, mysterious Eastern arts was fading into the era of structured, scientific fighting. What no one expected was that the real event of the evening hadn't even been announced yet. Before the finals began, Chen stepped forward and asked for the microphone. At first, the crowd responded with applause, assuming he was about to thank his instructors or speak about sportsmanship, but Chen had something else in mind. Confidence had always been his strength, but like many champions, confidence had slowly begun to drift towards certainty, and certainty had begun to drift toward belief that he had already seen everything worth seeing. He spoke clearly, calmly, and without hesitation. He said that karate had proven itself in real competition, that it produced measurable results, that it created fighters who could perform under pressure. Then he paused, scanned the audience, and said something that changed the atmosphere in the room. He said, "Kung Fu isn't real fighting. It's performance. It's dance. It looks impressive, but it has no place in real combat." The words landed heavily, and for a moment there were a few scattered claps, mostly from his own students, but the rest of the audience shifted uneasily. The martial arts world, especially in the late 1960s, was full of pride, but it was also full of quiet respect between styles, and Chen had just crossed a line from confidence into challenge. Then he took one more step forward and said, "If there is any Kung Fu practitioner here tonight who believes otherwise, I invite you to come up and prove it." Silence followed. Not the kind of silence that comes from agreement, but the kind that comes from uncertainty. Some people looked around. Others leaned back in their seats. A few instructors folded their arms. Most Kung Fu practitioners present knew the reality of the situation. Tournament fighting followed specific rules, specific timing, specific expectations. Traditional Kung Fu, especially the more internal or close-range systems, was not built for point scoring. Accepting the challenge would mean stepping into a format designed for another style, against a champion who was bigger, stronger, and experienced in that exact environment. Seconds passed, then nearly half a minute. Chen waited, arms crossed, calm and confident. And just when it began to look like no one would respond, a voice rose from somewhere in the middle rows. "I accept." It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't angry. It was calm, almost conversational. The kind of voice someone might use when agreeing to help move a chair. Heads turned toward row 14. A slim man stood up slowly, dressed entirely in simple black clothing. No patches, no school logo, no belt, no sign of rank or affiliation. He didn't rush forward, he didn't gesture. He simply walked toward the aisle with the relaxed posture of someone who wasn't performing for anyone. As he approached the stage, a few people began whispering. Some recognized the face, others didn't. Chen, standing under the lights, watched him approach with a polite but puzzled expression. When the man stepped onto the platform, he gave a small nod and introduced himself simply, "My name is Bruce." At that time, Bruce Lee was not yet the global icon he would later become. He was known in certain circles, respected among martial artists who had seen his demonstrations, and recognized by a handful of students and instructors who understood that his speed and efficiency were something unusual. But to the general audience, he looked like a mismatch. He was 5'7" and weighed around 140 pounds. Standing next to Chen, the difference was almost startling. Chen looked like a heavyweight athlete. Bruce looked like a lightweight runner. Some spectators exchanged doubtful looks. Others leaned forward with curiosity. A few smiled politely, expecting the situation to end quickly and respectfully. After all, size, reach, and tournament experience mattered. On paper, this wasn't a contest. But Bruce didn't move like someone who had come to test himself. He moved like someone who had come to demonstrate something. The match was not officially part of the tournament bracket, and the organizers hesitated for a moment, but the energy in the room had already shifted. This was no longer just a competition event, it was a question that needed an answer. After a brief discussion, the two men were given space at the center of the stage. Chen assumed a familiar fighting stance, strong and structured, his weight balanced, his guard high, his eyes focused. Bruce stood differently. His posture was relaxed, almost casual, his lead hand slightly forward, his body angled, his weight light, ready to move rather than absorb. To some observers, it looked unconventional. To others, it looked like he wasn't taking the situation seriously. The referee signaled the start. Chen attacked first, stepping in with a sharp combination designed for tournament scoring, a quick front kick followed by a reverse punch. The movements were clean, fast, and practiced thousands of times. But something strange happened. The strikes landed exactly where Bruce had been a moment earlier. Bruce didn't block. He didn't retreat dramatically. He simply wasn't there. He shifted just enough, redirecting his body with minimal movement, conserving energy, watching, measuring. The audience murmured. Chen adjusted and attacked again, this time faster, adding a side kick and closing the distance aggressively. Again, Bruce moved, not backward but at angles, stepping slightly offline, intercepting with small hand movements that disrupted Chen's rhythm without committing to full counters. To the untrained eye, it looked subtle. To experienced fighters, it looked deeply unsettling. Chen's techniques were correct. His timing was correct. But his opponent wasn't reacting the way opponents were supposed to react. Within the first minute, something had already changed. Chen had expected resistance. He hadn't expected absence. Bruce's philosophy, though not yet widely known, was already guiding every movement. He believed in economy of motion, in interception rather than reaction, in eliminating unnecessary technique. His Wing Chun foundation emphasized close-range efficiency, while his evolving ideas, what he would later call Jeet Kune Do, focused on adaptability rather than rigid style. Instead of thinking, "What technique should I use?" Bruce focused on a simpler question, "What is needed right now?" And often, the answer was not a strike, but a small shift that made the opponent's strike irrelevant. By the third minute, Chen's breathing had changed slightly. Not exhaustion, but frustration. He increased his pace, launching combinations designed to overwhelm with volume. The audience leaned forward as the tempo increased. Chen's kicks were powerful, his punches sharp, his footwork aggressive. But Bruce continued to move like water around stone, never meeting force directly, never giving Chen a fixed target. Occasionally, he tapped Chen's arm, intercepted a wrist, or disrupted a step, each contact brief but precise, like a reminder that he was always in control of distance. And then something subtle happened that many spectators didn't immediately recognize. Chen stopped fighting his opponent and started fighting his frustration. That shift would change everything, because in martial arts, the real opponent is rarely the person in front of you. The real opponent is the moment when emotion replaces awareness. As the fourth minute began, Chen's attacks grew heavier. His movements became less about scoring and more about landing something decisive. Bruce, meanwhile, remained calm, his breathing steady, his expression neutral. To those watching closely, it looked less like a fight and more like a lesson unfolding in real time. And the lesson was just beginning. By the time the fourth minute began, the atmosphere inside the Long Beach arena had changed in a way no one had expected. What had started as a confident champion's demonstration had quietly turned into something far more serious. The spectators who had come to watch a tournament were now watching a question unfold, a question about size, about style, about what fighting really meant. Michael Chen could feel the shift even before he fully understood it. He had faced skilled opponents before. He had faced aggressive fighters, defensive fighters, unpredictable fighters. But he had never faced someone who seemed to erase the space where attacks were supposed to land. Every time he committed to a technique, Bruce Lee was already somewhere else. Not retreating wildly, not scrambling, but moving just enough, with almost unsettling efficiency. And efficiency in combat has a way of making power feel heavy and slow. Chen circled, adjusting his distance, trying to reset his rhythm. His training told him to stay composed, to return to fundamentals, to avoid rushing. But fundamentals depend on predictable responses. Tournament fighting had patterns: attack, block, counter, reset. Bruce wasn't playing that game. He wasn't blocking in the traditional sense. He wasn't countering with long exchanges. He was intercepting, disrupting, dissolving attacks before they could become combinations. It was like trying to throw punches at a shadow that occasionally tapped you on the shoulder just to remind you it was still there. The crowd was quieter now, but not from boredom. They were watching carefully, leaning forward, whispering less and observing more. Some karate practitioners in the audience began noticing details that casual viewers missed. Bruce's lead hands stayed alive, constantly adjusting distance. His footwork wasn't flashy, but it controlled angles. He didn't move more than necessary, and he never crossed his feet or overcommitted. This wasn't showmanship. This was control. Chen decided to increase pressure. He stepped in aggressively with a powerful side kick aimed at Bruce's midsection, one of his strongest techniques. The kick came fast, snapping forward with authority. But just as it reached full extension, Bruce shifted slightly offline and used his lead hand to guide the leg past him, not blocking force against force, but redirecting its path. At the same moment, Bruce stepped forward instead of backward, closing the distance. Chen barely had time to retract before Bruce's hand touched his chest. Not a strike, not hard, just a clear indication that an opening had existed. A ripple went through the audience. That small touch said something without saying it. If this were real, you would have been hit. Chen nodded slightly, acknowledging the moment, but inside, frustration tightened another notch. He reset his stance, determined to regain initiative. This time he attacked with a fast combination: jab, reverse punch, low kick, followed immediately by a spinning back kick. It was a sequence designed to overwhelm timing and force a defensive reaction. Bruce's response looked almost effortless. He slipped the first punch by a fraction, intercepted the second with a quick parry, stepped outside the line of the kick, and by the time Chen completed his spin, Bruce was already positioned at an angle behind his lead shoulder. For a split second, Chen had lost visual contact. That moment, brief as it was, sent a quiet wave of unease through him. Losing sight of your opponent, even for half a second, meant losing control of the fight. He turned quickly, resetting distance, breathing slightly heavier now, not from exhaustion, but from the growing mental pressure of chasing something he couldn't pin down. Meanwhile, Bruce's expression hadn't changed at all. Calm, focused, almost analytical. He wasn't trying to dominate the exchange, he was studying it. Bruce Lee had always believed that combat revealed truth faster than words ever could. You could talk about speed, but here speed was visible. You could talk about efficiency, but here wasted motion was exposed immediately. You could talk about style, but here style was either useful or it wasn't. Around the 5th minute, the pace intensified. Chen stepped in with more commitment, driving forward with combinations meant to corner Bruce and limit his movement. For a moment it seemed to work. Bruce reached the edge of the platform space with less room to angle away. The audience leaned forward, sensing a turning point. Chen launched a high roundhouse kick, powerful and fast, aimed at Bruce's head. And this time, Bruce didn't just evade. He stepped inside the kick. To most fighters, stepping toward a high kick feels counterintuitive, even dangerous. But Bruce understood timing and distance with remarkable precision. By moving forward at the right moment, he reduced the power of the strike and jammed the technique before it could fully extend. His lead hand intercepted Chen's supporting arm, and his other hand rose toward Chen's center line, stopping inches short of contact. Another clear message: you were open. The crowd reacted more audibly now. Not cheers yet, but the sound of realization spreading through the room. Chen's jaw tightened. He had spent years perfecting techniques designed for speed and scoring. They had worked against everyone else. But here, every technique seemed to carry an invisible risk. Every extension created an opening Bruce was ready to exploit. The realization began to sink in that this wasn't a contest of who had better techniques. It was a contest of timing, awareness, and adaptability. And Bruce was winning that contest without looking like he was trying. As the 6th minute began, fatigue finally started to appear in Chen's shoulders. Not physical exhaustion exactly, but the fatigue that comes from mental overload. Fighting someone unpredictable forces constant recalculation, and constant recalculation drains energy faster than physical exertion alone. His attacks became heavier, more committed, less exploratory. He wasn't probing anymore. He was trying to land something decisive. Bruce adjusted immediately. Instead of only evading, he began intercepting more directly, what he later described as the core idea behind Jeet Kune Do, the way of the intercepting fist. When Chen stepped in, Bruce met the movement early, disrupting balance before the technique could develop. A quick stop kick to the thigh halted forward momentum. A sharp hand interception broke rhythm. None of the actions were excessive. Each one was brief, precise, and controlled. Control was becoming the real theme of the exchange. At one point, Chen rushed forward with a flurry, abandoning structured combinations in favor of raw pressure. Bruce moved laterally, guiding Chen past him, and Chen nearly overstepped his balance. A few spectators gasped quietly. Losing structure, even for a moment, was dangerous. And that was the moment the emotional shift completed. Chen was no longer fighting Bruce Lee. He was fighting the fact that nothing was working. The 7th minute began with the highest intensity yet. Determined to regain dominance, Chen launched his most powerful attack of the exchange, a full-speed high kick, followed immediately by a driving forward step meant to close distance and force contact. Bruce read it instantly. As the kick rose, Bruce stepped inside again, but this time he didn't just jam the technique. He redirected the legs slightly with one hand while stepping forward on a precise angle. His other hand shot forward in a straight line toward Chen's throat. Then he stopped. His knuckles hovered less than an inch from the target. Chen froze. For a moment, neither man moved. The arena fell completely silent. Everyone understood what had just happened. The exchange hadn't ended with a strike. It had ended with a choice. Bruce had the opening, the position, the timing. In a real fight, that would have been the decisive moment. But he didn't hit. That restraint carried more impact than any strike could have. After a brief pause, Bruce lowered his hand and stepped back calmly. The referee stepped in, signaling the end of the exchange. For a second, the silence remained, as if the audience needed time to process what they had witnessed. Then the arena erupted. Not just applause, but the sound people make when their expectations have been completely overturned. Some stood. Others clapped slowly at first, then louder. Instructors nodded to each other. Students whispered excitedly. Even those who had come skeptical now understood that something important had just happened. Chen stood still for a moment, breathing steadily, his expression thoughtful rather than defeated. He had not been knocked out. He had not been humiliated, but he had experienced something rare in a champion's career. He had been shown a gap in his understanding. Bruce approached him, bowed respectfully, and Chen returned the gesture. There was no hostility left, only respect. Because in martial arts, the greatest victories are not over opponents, they are over illusions. And that night, in 8 minutes, an illusion shared by much of the martial arts world had just been challenged. But the evening wasn't over, because Bruce Lee wasn't there to win a challenge. He was there to explain a new way of thinking. And what he would show next would influence martial arts for decades to come. The applause inside the Long Beach arena didn't fade quickly. It rolled in waves, rising and falling as people stood, sat, and then stood again, still trying to process what they had just witnessed. For many spectators, the 8-minute exchange had been entertaining, impressive, even surprising. But for the serious martial artists in the room, something deeper had happened. They hadn't just seen a smaller man handle a larger champion. They had seen efficiency challenge strength, timing challenge power, and perhaps most unsettling of all, they had seen the possibility that many of their long-held assumptions about fighting might be incomplete. Bruce Lee, however, didn't react to the attention as a performer would. He didn't raise his hands, didn't bow dramatically to the crowd, didn't acknowledge the applause beyond a simple nod. To him, the exchange had not been a victory. It had been an introduction. When the noise settled, one of the event organizers approached Bruce and asked if he would like to say a few words. The audience quieted again, curious now not just about what he could do, but about how he thought. Bruce stepped forward, still calm, still composed, and spoke in the same relaxed tone he had used when accepting the challenge. He began by clarifying something important. He said he wasn't there to prove that Kung Fu was better than karate, or that one style was superior to another. Styles, he explained, were only tools, and tools were useful only when they fit the situation. The problem, he said, was not karate or Kung Fu or any system. The problem was when a system became a cage. Then he asked for a volunteer. A young black belt stepped onto the stage, eager but slightly nervous. Bruce asked him to throw a basic straight punch. The punch came fast and clean. Bruce intercepted it effortlessly, redirecting the arm and stepping into position. Then he explained what had happened, breaking the movement down in simple terms. Most people think of fighting as block, then counter, he said. But why block if you can intercept? Why defend after the attack has already begun, if you can stop the attack before it develops? He repeated the demonstration, this time showing how minimal movement created maximum effect. There was no wasted motion, no dramatic flourish, just directness. Next, he demonstrated distance control. He asked the volunteer to try to touch his face. The young man lunged forward, and Bruce leaned back just enough to avoid contact, then stepped in instantly with a controlled stop inches from the chest. The audience began to understand what they had seen earlier in the match. Bruce wasn't faster because he moved more. He was faster because he moved less. Then Bruce spoke about something many fighters avoided discussing: emotion. He explained that most people didn't lose fights because of lack of technique. They lost because frustration, fear, or anger disrupted their timing and decision-making. When you become emotional, he said, you become predictable. When you become predictable, you become easy to control. Several instructors in the audience nodded quietly. They had seen it happen in tournaments, in sparring, and perhaps even in their own training. After that, Bruce began what would later become one of his most famous concepts: simplicity. He demonstrated a series of techniques from different martial arts: karate strikes, boxing combinations, Wing Chun trapping, fencing-style footwork. Then he stopped and said something that stayed with many people long after the event. Absorb what is useful. Reject what is useless. Add what is specifically your own. It wasn't a rejection of tradition. It was an invitation to evolve. The demonstration continued for nearly 15 minutes, but it never felt long. Bruce explained centerline theory from Wing Chun, showing how controlling the middle of the body reduced reaction time. He demonstrated the idea of broken rhythm, changing timing so opponents couldn't anticipate movement. He showed how small adjustments in angle could neutralize larger opponents without requiring equal strength. And throughout the entire demonstration, he emphasized one principle again and again: adaptability. Water, he said, holding his hands loosely, has no shape. It becomes the shape of whatever contains it. Martial arts should be the same. Not fixed, not rigid, alive. In the audience, Michael Chen stood quietly near the edge of the platform area, watching every movement. The earlier tension in his shoulders had disappeared, replaced by something far more valuable than confidence or pride: curiosity. Champions rarely lose their belief in themselves, but the best champions know when they have encountered something worth learning from. Chen replayed the 8-minute exchange in his mind, remembering the moments where his attacks had felt heavy, where his timing had been disrupted, where frustration had crept in. He realized that Bruce hadn't beaten him with superior strength or endurance. Bruce had operated on a different level of understanding. When the demonstration ended, the applause returned, louder this time, but the energy was different. It wasn't excitement anymore. It was respect. After the crowd began to disperse, Chen approached Bruce. There was no microphone now, no audience attention, just two martial artists standing face to face. Chen bowed slightly and spoke honestly. He said the experience had shown him weaknesses he hadn't recognized before. He asked if Bruce would be willing to train with him. Bruce smiled. For Bruce Lee, this moment mattered more than the challenge itself. His goal had never been to defeat other martial artists. His goal was to break the walls between systems and encourage growth. He agreed, and over the next 2 years, Chen would train under him, learning principles that reshaped his entire approach to combat. Their training did not focus on memorizing new techniques. Instead, Bruce stripped away habits. He shortened Chen's movements, adjusted his stance to improve mobility, introduced boxing-style footwork for fluidity, and emphasized interception rather than reaction. He made Chen spar outside his comfort zone, facing different styles, different ranges, and unpredictable timing. At times, Chen found the process frustrating. Years of structured tournament training had created patterns that were difficult to unlearn. But slowly the changes took hold. Chen later described the experience as learning to fight again from the beginning. What changed most wasn't his technique, it was his mindset. He stopped thinking in terms of karate versus kung fu and began thinking in terms of distance, timing, energy, and intent. He learned to stay relaxed under pressure. He learned to observe rather than react emotionally. He learned that real mastery wasn't about collecting techniques, it was about understanding principles. Meanwhile, the influence of that night began spreading beyond the two men who had stood on the stage. Several instructors who had attended the event began experimenting with cross-training. Some karate schools introduced boxing drills for hand speed. Some kung fu practitioners began focusing more on sparring and timing rather than forms alone. The rigid boundaries between styles didn't disappear overnight, but they began to soften. And Bruce Lee's ideas continued evolving. Within a few years, he would formally describe his philosophy as Jeet Kune Do, the way of the intercepting fist. But more important than the name was the mindset behind it. Jeet Kune Do was not meant to become another style. In fact, Bruce warned against that repeatedly. If Jeet Kune Do became fixed, he said, it would lose its purpose. The goal was freedom. Freedom from rigid patterns. Freedom from tradition that no longer served function. Freedom to adapt. Looking back, many martial arts historians later pointed to the late 1960s as a turning point. Before that era, most systems trained within their own boundaries. Afterward, cross-training, practical sparring, and functional efficiency became more common. While many factors contributed to that shift, moments like the Long Beach Exchange helped accelerate the change. As for Michael Chen, his career continued, but with a different approach. He remained strong, disciplined, and competitive, but those who trained with him later noticed a difference. He moved more fluidly. He wasted less energy. And perhaps most importantly, he encouraged his own students to learn from other systems rather than dismiss them. Years later, when asked about the night in Long Beach, Chen didn't describe it as a loss. He described it as the night he stopped thinking he had already mastered martial arts. Because the real lesson of that evening wasn't about kung fu defeating karate. It was about humility defeating certainty. It was about understanding that strength alone is not enough, that technique alone is not enough, and that the moment you believe you already know everything is the moment you stop growing. Bruce Lee once said, "A wise man can learn more from a foolish question than a fool can learn from a wise answer." On March 20th, 1969, in front of 500 people, one question was asked, and for 8 minutes, the answer changed martial arts forever.